Welcome to Season 2, Episode 7 of the Inclusive Chronicles, Tips and Tricks for Inclusion in Alberta. My name is Kelsey Bagnall, and I am the Communications Officer with the Council for Inclusive Education. I am also one of our hosts for our podcast. Today's episode was recorded on Treaty 6 and Treaty 7 land. We thank our guests for joining us on today's episode, and we hope you enjoy your time listening about play in the inclusive classroom.
The Alberta Teachers Association respectfully acknowledges that we are located on Treaty 4, 6, 7, 8, and 10 territories, the traveling route, gathering place and meeting grounds for Indigenous peoples, whose histories, languages, cultures, and traditions continue to influence our vibrant community. We are grateful for the traditional knowledge keepers and elders who are still with us today, and those who have gone before us. We recognize the land as an act of reconciliation and gratitude to those whose territory we reside on or are visiting.
Welcome to the Inclusive Chronicles, tips and tricks for inclusion in Alberta. My name is Kelsey Bagnall, and I will be your host for today's episode. Today's episode is all about play and inclusion. And today I have two amazing guests with me to have a conversation about play and inclusion. So I have Cindy Hodges and Joshua Lafleur. And Cindy, I'll pass the microphone off to you for you to introduce yourself.
Right. I am a grade 1 French immersion teacher with Rocky View School Division. I've been a teacher with Rocky View for 8 and a bit years now. Prior to that, I worked briefly as an education assistant with Rocky View. Because I had to upgrade because I had moved here from the UK and qualified as a teacher there. So I did a few years teaching in the UK as well. And I would describe myself as an initially, and Kelsey, you'll back this up, very reluctant play-based learning teacher to now a passionate proponent for it.
Awesome. Thanks, Cindy, for introducing yourself. And Joshua, I'll pass the mic to you.
Thank you. I'm Joshua Lafleur. I'm an instructional coach with Rocky View Schools, focused mostly on K-9, helping teachers support their multilingual learners. And before that, I was a grade 3 to 8, usually generalist teacher for about a decade.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Cindy and Joshua, for introducing yourselves. So today we're going to talk about play-based learning, and this is something that is near and dear to my heart. I love play in the classroom, and I'm super excited because next year I am returning to the classroom, and I'm super excited to use play as a modality for access points for students learning. And so I'm going to start off with a question for both of you. How do you both define play-based learning? And why do you think it's important for inclusive education?
I'll say, so I think it's important. In my classroom, it was always the number one driver of equity and inclusion. It broke down barriers, it builds community, it fosters risk-taking, and I don't think it's any one thing. It can be the free play that we often see in early grades that should continue but doesn't usually get too high in grades. It could be something very structured. I know at Sarah Thompson's school, the grade 4 team works on learning social studies through their own Dungeons and Dragons style role-playing game, making their way across Canada. I think when I see creativity, curiosity, high engagement, there's probably some playful learning happening.
Thank you. Go ahead, Cindy. What do you think?
This was just super tricky for me because it's so many things. But I think that if I was going to put it as succinctly as possible, I would just steal from Jean Piaget and say it is the child's work. It is an essential bridge between their experiences and their learning. And as a grade one teacher, I believe that it's a massive part of their overall development, like socially, emotionally, intellectually, all aspects of it. It's a developmental aspect that should be taking place. So that to me is, it's the child's work, and that's how they grow and develop.
Yes, I think back to my own experience a couple of years ago, and this was during COVID times. So there was a huge amount of cleaning protocols and masking protocols and all of that. And although there was barriers to play, I had the opportunity to have amazing kids that year, and they really helped with some of that cleaning protocol so that we could do play and that we could get our materials out for kids to engage with and show their learning in so many different ways. And they don't even know that they're learning. And that's the fun part about play in classrooms is often they don't realize that they're learning. And when I reflect back on my own learning as a K to 12 student, I reflect back fondly on how I learned trench warfare from the First World War. And it was from a social studies teacher that I had in grade 11 who took us down to the gym. I think he wanted us to clean out the storage room because he was also a volleyball coach and it was the end of the volleyball season, but he had us build trenches with the equipment in the storage room, and we had so much time to build our trenches. And then it was like dodgeball, but the different balls were different types of weapons that were used during trench warfare and World War One. And I don't think I know more about World War One than I do about trench warfare because how I experienced and learned that. I was engaged in that play, even in grade 11 in social studies 20. 25 years ago. So for me, play played an integral part for me as a learner in learning about curricular matter, especially as somebody that has dyslexia and writing is hard and reading was hard for me. So it was really important for me as a learner, and I'm super passionate about providing students with similar opportunities.
Mhm.
Um, can you, either of you, share a moment or an example where you saw play-based learning make a real difference for a student who might have had a hard time accessing curriculum um, in a more traditional way?
I am thinking about a student I actually have this year. It is tricky because I do play-based learning every day, and it is really interesting just my cohort each year, watching them progress and the change as they grow, because they always kind of, each cohort has their own kind of play vibe. Every year it just develops into this thing. But a specific student I have, and this is the first year I've done this, which is I have a student diagnosed with autism, and his IPP goal, which is a communication and social interaction goal, is being addressed through play. So I'm actually using the play to facilitate that developing those skills. So for this student, we were working on specifically, having back and forth conversations. And I observed at the beginning of the year in September, when we would have play, it was very much he'd play in parallel to other kids, but not engaging. He was like developmentally hadn't gone beyond parallel play. And he was working one-to-one with the CDA. So he was learning, explicitly being taught specific skills and strategies, but then the free play in the afternoon allowed me the opportunity to work with him directly in an authentic way to build that back and forth thing. So I go side alongside, start asking him questions. I got the back and forth conversation. Then other kids started joining in, and seeing him going from not really engaging at the beginning of the year and having difficulty during times that transitions and recess. It was just like every day there was an issue, to now virtually no, not no no he has great relationships with his peers. All those things that were really tricky for him in September, he's much more confident. And I love having that chance in the afternoon during free play, because I'm also free to then work with students, on specific skills that they need to build, that you can't build through worksheets, right? So yeah.
Awesome. I'm going to pause us just for 1 second. I had a kid come in, so I'll cut this part out and then Joshua will go to Zoom.
Okay, I love that story, Cindy. And you see what Kelsey was talking about, how learning is happening without them knowing that they're learning.
Mhm.
And that's what I'm thinking about as well. I picture one student who really got so much out of readers' theater, and that was a very playful practice that helped so many students in my class with decoding and comprehension and building all their reading skills because of the risk taking being lowered, where if they make a mistake, well, they're just doing a cowboy voice. They're just being this character. They're acting. It's not them. And one student who came mid-year had very limited English skills so far. She really didn't like to speak, extra didn't like to read, didn't even want to read one-on-one with me. And yet, if we got her into a reader's theater and one student's doing a big bear voice, she was fine to do the squirrel voice beside her. And then she was so happy and so proud of herself. And it just keeps going all day long.
That's so awesome. I think back to my classroom 4 years ago, and something that I hope to bring in my future classroom next year is I taught writing through play through a structure called Story Workshop. And for me, um, my grade 1 students came to me after 4 months of at-home learning during the first COVID shutdown. And so we we're all over the map, which we always are, in any grade and in any curriculum that we teach, how we are all over the map in where people are at developmentally and where people are at in the writing process. And so one of the things that really helped foster writing for my students to be inclusive was play. The idea that we play and we can use manipulatives, different types of manipulatives, whether it's peg dolls, whether it's loose parts, whether it's art materials, whether it's clay, and we can play with those materials to engage and make a story. And some of our kids that year needed a lot of modeling on what play could
Mm.
look like, especially coming out of COVID, because there was a large amount of screen time, just plain and simple. People needed to work from home. And so screens were involved. And it took time for that play to develop to make stories. But once that happened, it was an entry point that all kids could get into writing, wherever they were accessing from and where they needed to start developmentally. And some of our kids, that meant they were telling the story and I was scribing it at the beginning of the year. And then some of our kids had a few first letter sounds, and so their words started with the first sound that they would hear in a word, and it was so it allowed students to progress in their writing skills naturally and in an inviting way because students were able to pick the materials in which they felt most comfortable with playing, but um, the expectation was always by the end you would have something written on your paper. And by the end, it was like huge. Some kids were writing a full 3-page scribbler story by the end of, a 35-minute block, and some kids weren't, and that was fine because everybody was writing and engaged in curriculum at their level with the amount of, I think, of the zone of proximal development and how those experiences for kids allowed me to push them a little bit, but not outside of that zone. And so that like play can really help students have access points.
Yeah, I have this similar journaling happening in my classroom, but when you're a French immersion teacher, you have the additional challenge of that they're writing in a language that they're only just beginning to explore. So that it takes a long time for them to accumulate that vocabulary and then learn how to write sentences. But we do journaling probably at the end of, so I have a very structured free play. We plan, and they plan it in French now. So they tell you, je joue avec, like completely in French. So I'm teaching them all the names of the things in the classroom, and we add, and it's a great way to just build. Over the year they've learned different ways of talking about how they're going to play. So now we start by play planning, and everybody shares where they're going to play, who they're going to play with, what materials, completely in French. Like they were completely in French by January, which was thrilling. They do all their play, then we clean up, and now we've got journaling. So I ask them to reflect on what they did today. They play lots of different things, but they choose their most memorable thing. They draw a picture and they have to say, qui, quoi, où, where they play, who they play with. They draw their picture and then they write about it. And it's interesting when I compare that writing to when I'm doing more formal writing lessons where, we're writing about a topic that's directed by me. It's more like pulling teeth during that one, but I have to fight to get their journals off them because it's at the end of the day we're doing writing, which traditionally is probably not the best time to do it. But nope, they produce amazing writing, and we do outdoor learning once a week in the afternoon. And when they come in, I see some of them like literally taking their sneakers off, gluing on their page, and then dumping some of the sand so that they can describe that they played in the sand. They're trying to glue pine cones in it. Like they're bringing things from outdoor and they're writing about it, which brings not only literacy, but science into it. But what gets me is how they come in and it's like we put on some calm music, not a peep. They're all just so hyper focused. And I think it's because they're writing based on what they want to write rather than me directing it.
Authentic.
It's authentic, and they feel a real sense of ownership over it, right? It's entirely directed. But I love that now, instead of in previous years when I would teach writing, there'd be a lot of groaning and do I have to? And no, they know they and every one of them, and they all produce different things and it looks different. But I think that sense of authenticity and ownership and being able to direct what that writing is going to be is what's made the difference.
I love it. I absolutely love hearing stories. And for our listeners that are out there, I've heard Cindy talk about her journey with play-based learning before, and it always brings me joy when I hear her talking about play, because you are a huge inspiration to me as I go back into the classroom thinking about how I can bring play in, because I dabbled during COVID with lots of barriers, and now we don't have those barriers. And so I'm super excited to tap into Cindy's experience over the last couple of years, to bring those elements back into my own classroom, because I didn't have the same environment based off of COVID that we have now. And I'm super excited to learn from you, Cindy, as we get.
And it's so funny because COVID was what precipitated this for me. So like you were already doing it before. And I was a grade 1 teacher knowing I was getting some kindergarten kids. And I don't know why I thought this, but I was just like, play is for kindergarten, which is ridiculous because I'm qualified in early childhood education. I should have known better. But I got into this mindset of curriculum. I don't have time to do play-based. But then I realized, they're coming back. They missed a big chunk. And I thought it was important for kindergarten. So I'm like, okay, I will do a kindergarten-y vibe. And I'll be honest, I didn't think it was going to last. I thought it was just a solution in response to COVID. I actually think it's more important now than it was then. Because the kids who are coming to my classes now, like it never, I thought by this point, the grade ones I'm getting now didn't really experience COVID in the same way that earlier. They need to play more than the my first cohort. Like some of them genuinely don't know how to play. They don't know what to do. And it comes back to that comment you made about screen time, and they're attending lots of things and they're not playing outside as much, and they need it just as much now, if not more so, than then. And that was unexpected to me. I was not expecting that.
That's a that's a great observation to see. Have you either of you seen one of the things that came out in my classroom 4 years ago was the increased ability and problem solving skills that came from the play that happened inside the classroom, because I was there to foster some of that and really model and help support that. But then because they were experiencing that in the classroom, I started to see a reduction of the line that came of kids after lunch recess coming in with problems and problems that they didn't know how to solve with their kids. Have either of you seen any of those type of unanticipated but happy things that come from play?
I think bigger critical thinking and problem solving, sustained ability to work as well, because they've played and they were playfully writing and they wrote twice as long as they would have normally. Now they've built that skill. We go to another kind of work, they're able to apply that skill and keep working past those time restraints. And I would often hear from parents that they're seeing those changes at home, that they want to go play outside more. They want to, they're able to solve a lot of those things that often got them stuck.
Mhm. Yeah, I would agree. And I think because as a teacher, I can see the benefit for me when they're in free play and it's like it looks like chaos when it starts and they're busy setting up. And then one of the things I did learn to do was when the kids were engaged in it, I didn't use that as prep time or sit up. I floated around the room. I resisted the urge to tackle my never ending to-do list. I went around, I listened, I made notes. I even have my own play journal where I record what the students are playing. It is interesting because I love to, and I actually record on my lesson plan every day when we do the planning process where they're playing and who they're playing with. And it's interesting because then you're like, oh, hold up. There's this whole world beyond Lego, Jane, why don't you try, and just seeing where they go. But also, it allows me the freedom to go around and coach and mentor kids in that problem solving. So if there's everybody else is engaged, but when you're trying to problem solve a problem while simultaneously teaching a lesson, that's a really big challenge. So having my entire afternoon being free play allowed me to go around and explicitly teach skills, scaffold what was going on, and it absolutely has a knock-on effect. Absolutely. They can solve problems. I don't get recess problems at all anymore, really. And the only time it arises if they're maybe having a dispute with a student from another class. But within our class, and it creates very much a family vibe, right? So we solve the problems in the classroom.
I love that. So, with anything, there is sometimes challenges in implementing play. And so I'm curious, have you experienced any barriers or any challenges? I mentioned earlier, like when I started doing play during COVID, one of the barriers was the cleaning protocols and how much we had to clean the materials because of the sharing and all of that. And so that was a barrier to implementing play. I'm just curious if either one of you have also seen any barriers and maybe how you overcame those barriers so that the students could still have that inclusive access point through play.
Um, I think often the play itself can break barrier. So like I'm thinking with you mentioned story workshop, there was a student who could not stay in the or would not stay in the classroom. He was often escaping and was not producing the work. And when they tried story workshop, he stayed and he played and he created. And then this was a little student who didn't have much English. He did text to speech in Ukrainian. And then when it translated, the whole class was able to hear his story for the first time. And so technology is a part of that as well for taking down barriers. Um, I think just trying um, one of the practices from building thinking classrooms, the visibly random grouping, where students know that this really was a real random group, that is a way to break down a lot of barriers where you can stop cliques from just working together or people always working in the same ways, same places. And it's helping that risk taking and trying to be the leader today because I don't feel like I got put in Kelsey's group because Kelsey's going to lead me. She's so much smarter. I have to go learn from her.
Mm, I like it. I like those, talking about those barriers. How about you, Cindy?
I think I would come at it more from what I've heard from other teachers. So I did a presentation recently. I've been working with the Workman School of Education. We've done a lot of research. I've worked with Dr. Kim Lenters and Dr. Mosher. And it is really interesting because they're very theoretical based. And then I'm practicing. When we have discussions, I'll make these observations. And then they'll actually give me the theory that supports it. I'm like, oh, okay. So it's very interesting. But when we did our recent presentation on infusing more play in the classroom at the Palliser Convention this spring, there's three common comments that come up. One is, what about the curriculum? Because they perceive play as very frivolous and not real, authentic, not learning. The other thing is I don't have the time, which is a challenge. And these are all challenges that I brought up many times to you, Kelsey. You were trying to persuade me to engage. And then the other thing, another important aspect is just assessment. And I'm still trying to figure that piece out. But the curriculum thing, if we go back to my original comment, which is that I made a concerted effort based on what I learned in Story Workshop and the play-based cohort within RVS that I was a part of, which is that I would sit and watch. I would just watch what happened. And I learned so much about my students, and they know so much more than you find out in a lesson. So I remember one time I was about to tackle in science plants and growing things from seed. So I had a student in my class who, on a side thing, I also had a student who had really big sensory issues and communication. He was autistic and non-speaking. And so my goal for him that year was just to get used to new sensations, either hearing things, because play is very chaotic. But I decided to have like a dirt area. I had a big bin full of dirt, and then I had little seeds and things to represent seeds. And my intention was just to find out what they know. Well, every single kid demonstrated very clearly that they knew exactly how to plant a flower. They knew, or a plant, they knew all that. I'm like, well, I'm not going to teach that then. So out went my plants. And then we looked at, you know what, we're going to come at a different angle. You're bringing in strawberries and peppers. We're going to cultivate those seeds and grow from actual real food and look at different ways of propagating other than in the dirt. Had I not had that play center and had I not listened, I would have taught them something they already knew, right? So as you listen to the kids, you find out what they know, and then you also realize that there's a lot of curricular outcomes happening during the play. So much. So much. And what's wonderful about the play is that you can extend it and take it, and the kids go off on these tangents. Like they're really big fans of Magnetal, and they discovered that one kid discovered that the Magnetal stuck to the metal part of his chair, and then he shared it at the end of play. Sometimes we do journaling, other times we just share what we did in French, and he shared it, and then suddenly for the rest of the week, everybody was taking the Magnetals, not building, but going around the room, finding what it could connect to, and having conversations. And it's like, wow, awesome. The other barrier is the time. And that is a really big struggle because I have to teach, so many minutes of literacy and math, and I wanted to have that free play. So I had to look at my schedule. So out went agenda time, out went, whole class art. So instead of having whole class art, I have an art station. They're allowed to paint, glue, it's all there. Sometimes I'll run a little center to teach them a specific thing, but they do art whenever they want, however they want. And I just reflect it in their assignment saying, and make observations. So you have to really look at what you're doing during the day and take, like reading buddies, I had to offload that. I had to carve that time in and really think, what am I teaching during the day that's giving me the most bang for my buck? And what is just kind of fluff that I can let go in order to create that time? And that takes a lot. And the other thing too is like, not everybody's going to want to do free play. And you had alluded to this, Joshua, about the continuum of play-based learning. So you have like highly child directed, but I do all sorts of types of play. I do guided, outdoor learning is sort of between child directed and educator directed or guided in that I have a provocation. I read a story to get them going before we go for outdoor learning. I teach them a science lesson and ask them to take note of what they notice outside. Playful learning, like literacy, manipulatives, having, like in the morning I do, we call it morning work, but that's actually morning play. And they do it at their desk, and I have maybe a bin of Cuisinart rods, pattern blocks, and peg dolls. I don't tell them what to do. They go curate, they go to their desk, they build something. And what's interesting, sometimes it's something totally out there, but many times what they build is reflecting what we recently learned. So like when we had learned about Chinese New Year, suddenly everybody was building dragons, right? And it's kind of cool. And then they share what they did.
Of their learning.
They're learning, but they're directing it. And yeah, like if you just sit back and look, you realize they're actually, I would say my kids do more learning now than they did when I was just not doing play. And you can move anywhere. And I started off with just, okay, maybe I'll make the lessons more playful. That's how I started. And, or doing centers. I started off doing like Fun Friday, and then I realized like, okay, they got really upset because by the time and I only did it for half an hour, and I realized very quickly it was never enough time because it takes them half an hour just to negotiate what it's going to look like. And then you say clean up and they're like, oh, like, well, that was a waste of my time. So I learned as I went along, and it was very much dipping my toes in.
Cindy, you remind me of something I think a lot about with play and that curriculum piece and assessment piece. I'm often thinking about the PE teacher, and there's a lot of outcomes to do, and you can get through so many of them if you had a PE textbook and a bunch of worksheets and tests, and it'd be easy to assess. And hopefully nobody's teaching baseball that way.
Yes.
Or assessing baseball that way, or any of it. And so that's something I always remind myself when I have a new outcome to cover. Am I teaching this like a great gym teacher, or how am I going to do this? One example that was one of my favorite days, we spent a whole day doing science. We covered all the subjects in that day, and they went from acting out, it was around erosion and weathering of rocks. They acted out the water, and they were engineers at a point and drew blueprints. I gave them cookie sheets and sand, and they had to build, and then they had sod to put on it, and they got to experiment making things fall. And the whole time they documented it. So at the end of the day, they took their videos, they had to write transcripts and do voiceovers to make a published piece that explained why the city would have built their playground in a certain place to prevent weathering and erosion. So much fun and play. And we covered that whole unit in a day while still doing lots of language arts and lots of math and lots of DPA.
Yeah,
And I
and it
think
creates like this blending of all these subjects, right?
Yeah.
100%. And I think what is important to know is, Joshua, you knew your curriculum really well. And Cindy, you know your curriculum really well. So when you're sitting back and setting those provocations or setting those intentions with play, you know your curriculum. So although you're thinking you might observe this, when you observe this over here, it doesn't mean that this isn't useful. This might be something in a different curriculum that they're showing you, and you can assess that on the spot. And it wasn't a purposeful thing that came out of your intentions, but it doesn't mean that that isn't authentic knowledge of this curricular outcome. So I think one of the things for me is, especially returning to the classroom since there has been a change in curriculum in Alberta, is really solidly knowing my curriculum so that when I sit back and do those observations or have those conversations with students, that if it takes us in a different direction, that's okay. And I can use that for assessment of something that wasn't intended. And that's okay. It's okay to be flexible with it. And that is the beauty of using play, is it allows students to have ownership over their thinking and their learning, and to show it in an authentic time and place.
Because you know, they have the whole year to show this.
Yes.
And what I like about it is like it's nice to see them applying some of the learning that we've done in the class, and they may not apply it on the day that I taught it. They may apply it in but actually when they apply it 3 months later, I'm doubly excited because I'm like, wow, they retained it. So you know, bear in mind that, oh yes, you teach things in the classroom, but you will observe them authentically applying things. They're not going to adhere to your unit schedule.
Yes.
But yeah, absolutely. They have the whole year to demonstrate this. And, one of the things that I also love about play is very often the kids will demonstrate learning that they did not demonstrate when I asked them to come and do a quick quiz with Madame. And the perfect example of this, and thankfully every year they want to play this, which is school. They love to play school. And I see them. So, for example, like in French, grade 1 French, they have to learn to count to 100. And so, I'm one of the teachers that not all kids are comfortable. Like I have a counting captain, but they do not have to do it. They can say, no, thank you, I don't want to. There's some kids who just don't like showing you, or when they sidle up to you and you're like, okay, count to 100 for me so I can assess you. You're like, ugh. They got to 56 and then they conked out. Well, the next thing you know, you're watching them teaching counting to their friends, sitting their stuffies all lined up, and they are counting to 100 with perfect accuracy.
Yeah.
And it's like, interesting, you can do this. But there's no risk. The stuffies are not going to get upset with them. Their friends are just going to encourage them. And I've even seen like kids reteach my phonics lesson from that morning in the school, right? During that school thing. Also, you find out what kind of teacher you are. Apparently, I'm a very bossy one. Because they're like, I'm Madame Hodges, and they're acting as you're like, wow, okay, I gotta check myself. But I love that because I would not have seen that they're actually genuinely capable of doing those things. But in play, they just show so much more about themselves than you can ever get any other time during that. Like honestly, I see much more of their true learning and their true selves during play. Right. And that's what every parent wants for their kid. They want their kids to just be themselves and feel like this is an environment where I can just be myself. Right.
I love it. Well, I'm going to wrap up our time because we have talked for a good chunk of time, and I appreciate both of you for coming on our podcast, The Inclusive Chronicles, Tips and Tricks for Inclusion in Alberta. And thank you both, Cindy and Joshua, for sharing your knowledge and your passion for play with us today. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thanks for
Thank
Welcome
you.
back to our second season of Inclusive Chronicles, Tips and Tricks for Inclusion in Alberta. I have with me today, now President, Jennifer Lacourse of the Council for Inclusive Education. Today's podcast update here is in a response to the earlier segment on play and inclusion, where we hosted Joshua Lafleur and Cindy Hodges. So, welcome, Jennifer, to our podcast. So, today I have a couple of questions for you. They're follow-up questions based off of the segment that we did with Cindy and Joshua, and I'm going to ask you the questions and then I'm going to let you speak.
Oh, good. Okay, thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right. So we are here on Treaty 7 land here in Calgary. We just finished up our CIE conference yesterday, 2025, celebrating the challenges. And so my questions to you, my first question to you is, after listening to Joshua and Cindy's segment, what resonated with you the most about how play can support inclusion in Alberta classrooms?
I would first want to say I love how all three of you spoke about the risk taking and creativity that unfolds during play with kids. And then one other comment that I heard Joshua make was around the sustained focus building of kids when they're doing play and they're doing things that they like. Because at first they start and they are bouncing around like hummingbirds, everything. And then all of a sudden they get into it and it builds that sustained focus. And then that sustained focus moves over into their work areas. So that really resonated with me. And I was like, oh, this is like really going to be impactful when I am going to include it into my own classroom starting next year. So
love it.
Yeah.
Love it. And so then I'm going to ask a follow-up question on that. So based on what you heard in that segment, what opportunities or challenges do you see for bringing more inclusive play practices into your own work or into the school community or in the work that you do with inclusion across the province?
I really think the challenges are with our ever-changing curriculum right now. Like, and you'd made the statement, like the more in depth you know the curriculum, the easier it is to assess kids meeting curriculum outcomes through play.
Yes.
That's not as structured in some other ways. So I really took into that. And then it's just some of the things that I already do at my school is we do an after school group that's on loose part play. And so we don't let them have balls or anything where they can make organized games. It's just like they play with the playground equipment, or you play with chalk and bubbles and hula hoops or something. And it's very engaging to see how the kids are all interacting and building their skills and capacities. So I'm really looking forward to, as I move into an upper elementary classroom, how to engage free time play in the classroom that will still have structure within the curriculum and not just like a free-for-all chaos coordinator happening in my classroom. So one of the things you had mentioned, and I think Cindy had also mentioned it, was the story workshop. And I was like, oh, that's it. Because I don't like doing agenda messages. I don't like doing some of those like, oh, these are time fillers. And you have some kids that finish in like 30 seconds but then they're waiting 15 minutes for the rest of the kids to play, or rest of the kids not play. They're waiting for the rest of the kids to finish. And then people are distracted because if they do start playing, then the other kids, instead of finishing, are just watching them.
Yes. They want to go over there.
They're like, oh, what does he do?
Yeah.
I don't want to do that. And then they're not getting it done. So it's not an equitable situation. And Cindy had mentioned that she bookmarks her play up with journaling. And I was like, oh, that's a very neat idea. And so as I move into the classroom again, I really foresee myself putting in the work to build in parts of our day that have free part play, and then have the kids actually do real reflection and authentic writing to develop their writing skills and kind of moving forward. So those are my like really big takeaways. And I will be honest, I Googled that book right away. And I was like, I'm going to get that book.
We are going to get you a copy of that book.
Yeah.
It is one of the things, like I've implemented story workshop in my classroom previously, and I am also returning to the classroom next year. And I'm super excited to do story workshop again because it's this magical thing, especially I'm returning to grade 1. And in grade 1, in the board that I work for is half day kindergarten, and afternoons are really long for kids in grade 1. From September till December, their stamina, it just isn't there. And so for me, when I do story workshop in the classroom in grade 1 after recess or lunch, it provides that opportunity for building stamina in academics through play by doing story workshop at the beginning of the year. It really is a lot more focused on the play. And it's so funny how it transitions as the year goes on to really, some kids don't even pick up the loose parts by the end of the year because they're so entrenched in continuing the story that they wrote the day before. But sometimes they go back to the loose parts or to the art materials or whatever it is. And it's so interesting to see them be reflective in the process of writing that is about idea generation and not just the physical printing. And so it's really this cool process that happens all year long. And you see that academic growth from September all the way to June. And they don't realize that they're working on hard skills that are lifelong skills by playing. And they also learn through story workshop or play not just those academic skills, but how to problem solve in conflict and all
Yeah.
those softer skills, or what we call soft skills, that are actually really, really, really important for life, human beings.
Yeah,
So
I really like it. And I really think that that's missing as we get forced into these standardized tests and all these assessments. And like, I just spent May, I was in kindergarten or grade 1 for halftime this month for the last 3 months. And May has been just, okay, guys, we're going to do some assessments. And that's the whole focus, because they don't have the stamina to do the whole assessment in one sitting, or it's only part of the classroom because they were the ones that were at risk and the other ones weren't. And so it's just this whole, so they've been really, so my whole June, I'm like sending a note to the parents. I know we've been doing agendas. We're not.
you're going to take a little dip in.
We're going to dip into play and send home their journals once a week. And then
love it.
Then the parents can see what the kids are working on. And I send a weekly message home all the time anyway. So I did.
Yes.
So it's not the journal. Oh, I have 3 parents that maybe read.
Yeah, right. Like, and it takes so much time out of your day to do agenda, and 3 parents read it.
Yeah.
So
it's just like, let's be more purposeful in the activities that we're doing. And yeah, the agendas get the kids to practice writing, but I think more of them will engage in it when they're writing about something that they are excited to write about.
Yes.
And be able to tell their parents about what they're doing and learning at school.
So
yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Our new president, Jennifer Lacourse, we're super excited to have you on our podcast. And this won't be Jennifer's last time on our podcast. I can guarantee you will see her a lot as we move into the last part of season 2 and into season 3 of the Inclusive Chronicles. Have a wonderful rest of your day, everybody.
Bye.
As an organization that promotes and is committed to respecting human rights and ensuring a safe, secure, and healthy environment for all, the Alberta Teachers Association, ATA, works to ensure that all present or participating in ATA programs and events are protected from violence and harassment. All ATA members are therefore expected to promote and defend the fundamental human rights of everyone engaged in ATA programs, activities, or other ATA work. ATA members are expected to treat one another with fairness, respect, and dignity, and to uphold the highest standards of professionalism, accountability, competence, and integrity as representatives of the provincial association, as well as their respective locals and subgroups. Furthermore, ATA members are obliged to act to prevent violence and harassment wherever possible, and report to the appropriate person in authority any suspected breaches of this policy that come to their attention.